You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of Squid, the English band's second album called Oh Monolith. I'm not going to go on about the new wave of British indie. See any other English indie band for me to go on about it at length. Squid are one of the main alumni, I guess, with Black Country, New Road and Black Midi. And they're sort of like at the very top of this. They're on there. A lot of these bands are now coming through with second albums. I just saw that this one didn't do as well in the UK charts, which is quite annoying. It's almost like the public got bored. But Bright Green Field came out in 2021 and got great acclaim. They're from Brighton. And Ollie Judge, Louis Borlase, Arthur Ledbetter, Laurie Nankivel and Anton Persson. And they're very much in the lineage of the spikiness and yelping of Black Midi. Black Midi moved on quite substantially with their last album, the Stunning album. Sonically went in very different directions. So they weren't sort of in that same place that Squid were, which is quite long songs. I think quite a lot of them from that first album were actually pretty long. I'll just have a look at the track listing. And quite difficult. Yeah, so Narrator, 8 minutes. Boy Racer, 7.5. Pamphlets, 8 minutes. And they kind of got into this very sort of long builds and aggressive yelping. And this time around, the album is very, very different. I think that it's got a lot more melodic, and he's dropped he can sing, and he seems to have wound back the yelping an awful lot. Which is Ollie Judge, the lead vocalist, who seemed to be doing it for effect, and I think it put a lot of people off. I don't know why this album isn't doing so well, because it is more commercial, I think. So, Oh Monolith came out in June when I got this raft of albums and I forgot to review it. So here is a review of Oh Monolith, and I actually think this is not getting the acclaim it deserves. So, Swing in a Dream is one of their finest songs that opens the album, and it sets the tone that what we're getting here is a more melodic version of the band, I feel, rather than some quite punishing long-form songs. This is immediately a more melodic sound, and his voice, even when it's a little yelpy, is carrying a melodic line here, which he does throughout this album, which I don't recall happening that much on their first album. And the immediate addition of some sort of sci-fi synths in the background didn't sound like their last album either. And it's quite a short song. I think it's one of their most accessible and very strong, and doesn't stop them going demonic in the final quarter and becoming raucous. I think one of the things that happens here is they become raucous and yelpy for shorter periods. So they can blow up for a little while and then come back down into a melodic song a lot more on this album, which I think works a lot better. There's a trumpet throughout this album. Is there a trumpet player in the band that just plays trumpet? Because I do not remember as much. I'm going to go back to my original. Laurie Nankivel is down as bass guitar brass, but it's very strong. The trumpet comes in the background on the second track and then into the foreground on a few tracks. It's a short song, but it's got a very Devil's Den number 2. It's got a very explosive chorus, which is instantly recognisable and quite like shatteringly loud, which is unusual on this one. I think a little bit more. And again, a Siphon song, dreamy sort of vocoder track, which is totally unusual for what I've heard from them. 3 very different songs in a row, sonically, on this album. It's almost abrasive and noisy, but with the melody behind it, which is a hallmark of this album. Excuse me. And it's got this sort of like fizzing noise in the background that builds and builds, and it does remind me a little bit of Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. There's a song on that album that has a lot of noise and like almost industrial noise in the background, but still quite melodic. Undergrowth, I feel, is the centerpiece of the album. It's the longest. It is the longest. The tracks sort of get longer now, sort of over 5.5 minutes for virtually everything else on the album. It's got really quite funky grooves. I just mentioned Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. I was kind of Moon and Antarctica, sort of the more sort of dancey stuff on the Moon and Antarctica by Modest Mouse. And even sort of like Mogwai from Young Team, when they're sort of like doing that Herod sort of lurching, not quite as aggressive as that. But lyrically in it's a really cohesive album. And this one, I feel like, are you a cynic just like me? So many options to be disappointed. It's almost mocking hipster sort of thing going on here. And in that regard, I feel like their lyrics have stepped up a lot on this album. They seem to be much more sort of slogans on the last one. But in that regard, and musically, I do think they're up there with Black Midi at the very top. Although Black Country New Road were in a kind of more of a internal, personal, emotional space. These guys are much more sort of polemic and looking at the world as a whole. Track 5, The Blades, is another sort of centerpiece one. And it made me feel about Black Country New Road, their last album, Ants From Up There. And this one's looking down on the people, sort of like Orson Welles in The Third Man, where they're talking about people being blades of grass to be cut. I just imagine like Squid up there looking down on Black Country New Road, which is kind of what I just said about how Black Country New Road was sort of like the personal and interior, and Squid are sort of looking at the whole world. And it's got this weird amalgam of between the Red Hot Chili Peppers and In Rainbows by Radiohead, which I can't quite explain. It's got thousands of people down there, blades of grass, old enough to be trimmed. It's really quite nihilistic and apocalyptic, and that coming apocalypse is a theme that I think is the coherent centre of the album lyrically. After the Flash is like, it's almost like The Blades is the apocalypse happening, and then you get After the Flash, this creeping dread, sort of post-apocalypse almost. And the female voice and strings are a nice addition here to the sonic palette, which hadn't happened on the rest of the album. Just the coherent lyrics, sort of like the Rapture almost. Got this sort of... it feels like it's going through the Rapture in this song, maybe more than even in Undergrowth, but it feels like the wheel, like that ever-turning wheel. I can't remember the exact quote, but where that gyre starts turning more and more and more until the wheel comes off, until the people at the extremities of the circle are spat out. And it does get quite manic. If I could keep it up is a lyric from that one. And I felt like that sort of mid-section was the album plateauing. It's almost like it goes through this apocalyptic rapture and sort of comes out the other side. And Green Light, second from last, is sort of like a bit of a wake-up. It's a much more upright song and shorter. The Sunlight Hits My Skin, Life Forevermore, sort of like being in this new universe, I guess. And then a very sort of low-key but still driving final track with this amazing title, If You Had Seen the Bull's Swimming Attempts, You Would Have Stayed Away, which is quite something. And it sort of builds towards an end that, in a movie would be like a gunshot. It's not like a fade out at all. I thought this was excellent. I really did. I found myself really liking their first album and not loving it in the same way I would something like Ants From Up There, because I found that it was a little bit hard to love because it was quite angular and jutting out and off-putting. So it was kind of like a little bit punishing. And I feel like Black Midi really addressed that with their incredible second album and made it... focused on the lead singer's personality and the lyrics a lot more. And I feel like I did that here, and I really like the fact that the Longthorn songs with yelping, atonal yelping, have given way to more melodic, shorter songs where his vocals carry the melody of the song. I think that's a massive improvement for the band. I can't believe this album hasn't done better than the first one. What do people like? So I think this is superb. I definitely love it more than the first album. So for Squid and the album Oh Monolith, I'm going to give a 9 out of 10, one of the best albums of the year.